Book 7, The Soldier in the Middle of the World, Chapter 4. I just want to see what's going on out there. Mahrree had been watching from the window. There'd be 2 visitors today, and one was always on time. Through the path shoveled in the ash he came, pausing periodically to evaluate the area, then climbed the front steps to the house. His companion, Timon Sobat, a tiny man in his 60s, followed dutifully behind. Mahrree opened the door before John Offra could knock on it. "Hello, John," she said cheerfully, as she had every day since Mount Deceit erupted. She had a feeling she'd be doing this for many weeks more. The colonel they had recently stolen from the world needed his routines. He was a tall, almost gaunt man, his blonde hair going gray and his blue eyes shadowy and worried. The world had been hard on the man who had spent the last 25 years trying to frighten it. "Hello, Mrs. Mahrree." He was uncomfortable calling her that, but Mahrree thought it only fair since what he'd do next would make her uncomfortable. He extended his finger and put it on her cheek. "You are real." "Yes, I'm real," she verified. Dr. Toon, Shem, Timon, and Henri agreed this was the best way for John to come to grips with his new life. He looked around. "And this is real. And so is the ash." Yes, unfortunately, that too was real. Shortly after John arrived in Salem, Mount Deceit rained down upon them, and several times that day, Timon and his neighbors had to drag John back to the house because he couldn't believe it was real, even as the ash covered him. Finally, Timon sat outside with John, covered themselves with blankets, and watched the mountain fall down around them, because Timon couldn't believe it was real either. They went inside when they began to cough. The next day, John started making his rounds, stopping at the Zenuses, the Shins, the Breiters, and even visiting Eltana Jordan, just to make sure all of this was real. Mahrree was sure, as he began to finger a lock of her gray hair, that poor John Offra was never going to be sure about what was real ever again, even though the ash was slowly vanishing. Industrious Salemites had spent the last 3 days shoveling it into wagons and carting it away. They had plans. So did Mahrree. But first she had to go through this routine. While Timon waited on the porch, Mahrree let John into the gathering room, where he went to each portrait and verified its reality, patted little Mora on the head, and told her that she, the youngest Shin granddaughter, was real. Then he made his way to Mahrree's wing to see the last painting of Perrin again. "He was real. He was real, and he died. And it's all right," John muttered. He turned and smiled at Mahrree, and she saw the change. John had 3 expressions. The first was the dutiful, almost childlike behavior he'd just exhibited, where he talked dully and concentrated fully. His eyes were the blankest then. But then he'd suddenly shift, and suddenly he was the Offra Mahrree remembered, smiling hesitantly, talking easily, and with brighter eyes. Then there was, for lack of a better descriptor, crazy Colonel Offra. Something would cloud his countenance, and he'd become a typical army colonel, sarcastic, sharp, and officious. That one surfaced only briefly, because already he was realizing he didn't need to scare soldiers or spread rumors anymore. To his great credit, he was working to downplay that part of himself. Now he was friendly Offra, and he said cheerfully, "How are you, Mahrree? Can I bring you anything from Salem?" "No, thank you. We're doing just fine. I'm just a little stir-crazy, though," she admitted. Offra nodded. "Sergeant Major Zenas won't let you out because you're over 70, and I agree. Your lungs are too frail to handle this air, and it's not yet time for you to die." John frequently said things like that, carrying on a pleasant conversation, then dropping something dramatic in the middle of it. Mahrree was getting used to it, but Mora, who had been lurking behind the sofa, darted back into the kitchen where her mother was. "I don't see the problem," Mahrree said as they walked to the front door. I can wear a kerchief like all of you. She gestured to the ones the men had around their throats. I just want to see what's going on out there. Only when Guide Shem says so, John told her, almost childlike again. Now, off to Mrs. Jordan's to make sure she's still real. You know, Mahrree began, if she's being too unpleasant, which was a generous way of saying an irrational brute, you don't have to talk to her. Ever since Eltana learned that young Pear wasn't returning, but Thorne's wife and daughters were, she'd been hostile, according to the reports. Mahrree hadn't bothered to visit her. And again something shifted in John's countenance, and his smile became brittle. Oh, I'll visit her. She loves me, he said significantly. Oh, dear, Mahrree said, unsure if her smirk was appropriate. Yes, John sighed. She's realized that Salem has once more a former Army colonel living in it. And he gave her a meaningful look. And again, Mahrree said, oh, dear, but this time with much more worry behind it. Oh, I hadn't considered that. Is she making plans for you? Of course she is, barked Colonel Offra. She's lost every other man she thought would exact revenge for her, and now she thinks I'm here to serve her. His scoff of derision put Mahrree at ease. In spite of all of his instability, John was too clever to fall for Eltana's flattery. But she's been through a lot, Colonel Offra said magnanimously, and I can give her a few minutes each day. To be honest, Mahrree, John leaned in to whisper, the woman's not stable. Mahrree couldn't hold in her laugh, and John smiled kindly and nodded to Teeman, whose expression mirrored Mahrree's. All right then, to Mrs. Jordan's, Colonel Offra announced, but almost instantly John turned back again. Be careful, Mahrree. Obey Sergeant Major and don't go outside until it's safe. All right then? Mahrree smiled at his childlike earnestness. All right then. Will I see you tomorrow? Always, he said. I need to conduct the daily reality checks. As he marched down the stairs, he exchanged salutes with Mahrree's other daily visitor, who smiled tentatively as he came to the front porch. How's our colonel today? Asked Henry. Making evaluations about Eltana's stability, if you can believe that, she chuckled sadly. He sighed. I'm beginning to wonder if it's possible to rescue any sane people out of the world anymore. I should pay Eltana a visit soon. I was, after all, the rector who got her here. I'm guessing by your hesitancy that she's bitten your head off recently as well? She could already see the answer. Henry was looking weary. His tanned skin and normally merry hazel eyes still caused him to appear a youthful 74, but he didn't carry himself as largely as he used to. While still burly, today he was a little hunched over. Oh, yes, Henry said heavily, sitting on a bench on the porch. Mahrree sat in a chair opposite of him. Maybe you don't blame me for not finding young Pear, Henry said, but she sure is. Didn't look in the fort at all? He mimicked in a shrill voice. I promise I did, Mahrree, but Ralph assured me that it took him days to even recognize young Pear. Eltana's also none too happy that Druce's Thorne and her 3 daughters and son-in-law are living at the second resting station. She has no idea what traumatized, shattered women they are. If only she'd visit them, she'd realize we haven't brought Lemuel to Salem. He slumped dejectedly. You've done the right things, Mahrree assured him. Don't worry about anyone's opinions but the Creator's. He's the one who tells us who needs retrieving. Perrin wanted to bring Drusus and her daughters here for probably 15 years, ever since he heard they'd left Lemuel. It took years for them to finally come, and they have as much right to be here as Eltana Jordan. Maybe that's what bothers her. Sometimes those in the world struggle to understand that their enemies, especially the innocent family of their enemies, deserve the same lives that they do. That's her thinking she has to get straight, and not your problem, Mahrree." He smiled gratefully, then remembered. "You haven't met Drusus and her family yet, have you? Weren't they supposed to come for a midday meal? That was the plan before Deceit exploded." "No, I haven't," Mahrree cut him off, secretly relieved Deceit got in the way. While she wasn't bitter about the thorns, she also had no idea what to say to them. "So, you ran away from Lemuel too?" "Shem won't let me travel anywhere," Mahrree explained. "And don't bother visiting Eltana. She now thinks John Afra will be her champion." Mahrree rubbed his face. "Sometimes the world is still too much with us, Mahrree. We bring them out of it, yet they drag it with them." Mahrree sighed because he was right. She regarded Mahrree sympathetically, then suddenly realized, "Hey, you're a year older than me." He looked up from his brooding, amused. "You've known that for about how many years?" But Shem said no one over 70 is supposed to be out here breathing this air." He smiled slyly, showing his dimples. "You're sitting out on your porch breathing in this air. Aren't you worried he'll catch you?" But you've been over here every day checking on us and walking in this, and how come?" He chuckled. "Because Shem knows he can't order me around. He can suggest, he can implore, but I'm my own man. I'm older than him, and if I want to take chances with my health, I can. Besides," he added, "Shem made that suggestion primarily for one reason, or rather, for one person." He raised his eyebrows at her. It took Mahrree a few seconds to catch on. "Because of me?" "Yes." "Why?" she scoffed in surprise. "I don't need babying." Mahrree smiled sadly. "The wife of his best friend and brother, he thinks you do. Shem's terrified to lose you too, Mahrree," Mahrree confided quietly. "He couldn't bear it." She sagged. "It's not as if he could stop the Creator's will, you know." And Mahrree, now it was her turn to whisper, "If I don't get out of this house soon and see what's going on in Salem, I'll be less stable than John and Eltana put together." Mahrree laughed and Mahrree grinned to hear it. He was such a dear man, but... "Then Mahrree," Mahrree leaned in conspiratorially, "get out of here. Everyone has to wear a kerchief, guide's orders, and if you put something over your head, he'll never recognize you." "You know, I think I'm going to do just that." An hour later, her opportunity came by the means of her oldest grandson, Cambo Brighter, who had returned with the wagon and team. She recognized him even with the kerchief tied around his nose and a straw hat pulled down nearly over his eyes. He walked exactly as his father Deck did, and jogged up the front porch and into the house. "Aunt Lilla," he called as he came in, "Uncle Pato needs that file after all, the one of those requiring new houses. The building foreman wanted to see it. Is it still in his office?" "Nope, I've got it," Mahrree said, waving some pages. "Thanks, Mugga." He started to take them out of her hand, but she didn't release them. "I'm going with you." She tucked the file into her waistband, whipped out a kerchief, and tied it around her head as her grandson stared at dismay. "But, Mugga," he exclaimed, "Guide Zenas ordered that no small children or people over 70 or those with breathing problems should go out until it's all cleaned up." She waved that away and put on a straw hat. Hating the feel of it around her head, she put it back on the rack. "I'll risk it," she decided. "And yes, I know what Shem said. He's such a worrier. But I can make my own decisions about my own health. And if I don't get out of this house, I'm going to go insane. Right, Lilla?" she called. Lilla poked her head out of the kitchen. "Take her, Cambo, just to preserve my sanity. Bring her to the site. She can slip in among the crowd and not be noticed. We'll apologize to Shem later." Cambo blinked in surprise at his aunt's disobedience. But Mahrree smiled. After all these years, she was finally rubbing off on her. Cambo pointed at his grandmother. "If something happens to you, it's not my fault, right? This was all your doing. I'm just being respectful to my elders by doing what you demanded. Remember that." Mahrree grinned and squeezed his arm. All of the ranching boys were exceptionally strong. "Oh, I've taught you well. What a respectful young man. No wonder you're my favorite grandson today." Cambo chuckled, a little surprised by her lightheartedness. He led her outside and helped her into the wagon, then climbed in next to her. "Just keep your kerchief on as tightly as possible. I wish you were wearing a hat, though, Mugga." "I'll just brush the ash out of my hair later," she told him as he slapped the horses into a trot for the center of Salem. "No, I wish you were wearing a hat to disguise you. Everyone will see you and tell Uncle Shem." "For the past few days, everyone has had gray hair," she reminded him. "No one will notice mine." "You're probably right. Last night I had my hat off while I was brushing the ash off our roof, and when I came in, Decker looked at me and said, 'Are you now a grandpa?'" Mahrree laughed. "Oh, the wisdom of 4-year-olds. Oh, it feels so good to be outside again, Cambo. When I was your age, I could never stand to be outside. Now I couldn't stand to spend another day trapped in that house doing nothing useful." "Oh, Mugga," Cambo nudged her. "Feeding people and taking care of the younger kids, that's always useful." Yeah, Mahrree said blandly. "But really, Cambo, the greatest event in the history of the entire world happens, and Shem tries to keep me locked up so I miss it. I'm the director of the history department at the university. How can he expect me to hide inside and miss out on all the fun?" Cambo eyed her. "Mugga, you always had a strange sense of fun. I remember when we were littler and you tried to get us excited about inchworms. They only got exciting when we started racing them." Mahrree smiled at the memory. "And wasn't that fun? Although racing them to your cousin's open mouth while he slept on the table wasn't exactly the nicest thing to do." Cambo shrugged. "Young pair only swallowed 2. No lasting damage that we could see." Mahrree's thoughts wandered to where that grandson could be now. Salem's scientists had spent the past few days on the mountains, getting as close as they dared to what used to be deceit. They recorded the quaking, measured the amount of ash, dirt, and steam sent up by the crater, and worked out calculations as to where the bulk of the mountain went. The 15 men and women who rode up there each morning and came home late each night reached the same conclusion. Mount Deceit was all over the world, maybe even all the way to Idumea, and young Pear was somewhere in the middle. He was still alive, Mahrree was sure. Someone in the family would have felt something if he wasn't. Every night, morning, day, evening, and afternoon, she prayed for his safety. She did again as she twisted in her seat to look at the southwest, obscured by whirling gray clouds. She wished she were younger and fitter in order to spend a day with the scientists watching it all. She'd heard Shem discussing taking interested groups to the first peak to observe the volcano once it quieted down, and she'd do all in her power to sneak up with them, if only to try to gauge when the end of the end was near. She wished Perrin was there to watch it with her. Sometimes she thought he probably knew far more of what was happening than she did, and wished he could break away just for a moment to fill her in. But, she reminded herself, the day would soon come when she'd get to know about all of it. She just had to be patient. "I suppose you really should see it," Campbell interrupted her thoughts as he turned the wagon to a large field. It took Mahrree a moment to realize he was talking about the new block yard. "After all, Uncle Shem got the idea after seeing the experiments with ash that you and Mama were conducting with the children that first day. He told the brickworkers what you two noticed. They did some experiments of their own, adding ground-up lime, And there you have it." He gestured to the enormous amount of activity that lay before her in what was a great outdoor gaming field, now converted to be a much more useful space. Mahrree scoffed a laugh. "In a way, I'm glad Perrin's not here to see this. Oh, how he hated Block! So gray and unimaginative. And to see his beloved Salem greens turned into a massive block factory." Cambo stopped the wagon and helped her out. "There's always a use for everything, Mugga. I'm sure Pugga would have gotten over it, especially when Uncle Shem would have asked him, 'What else should we do with the stuff?' Besides," he lowered his voice, "with so much of the southwestern forest dead from the ash, we might be looking at a shortage of timber for building in the future." So, once again, the Creator gives us an alternative. When one resource is gone, there's always another, Mahrree marveled. She watched as thousands of Salemites, organized into different teams, moved around and with each other as if in a large, elaborate dance which they learned only yesterday. Long lines of wagons full of ash drove up to one of the many enormous pits dug during the past couple of days. The wagon owners carefully shoved their contents into the pits, trying to control the flow of material to keep it from blowing in the breeze. Workers kept a steady trickle of water and limey sand pouring into the pits. The mixture was churned by several oxen yoked together, walking in large circles attached to beams with extensions into the pits that stirred the concoction together. When the mixture was right, other teams of oxen, hooked up to another clever contraption designed by several building students from the university, walked in another circle to power the thick, heavy mixture up onto a large, wide-moving belt. The belt dumped the mixture into rectangular forms, which were then quickly packed down and slid down another long belt to be carted off to a kiln set up nearby. The blockyard had been fully in existence for only a day and a half, and already there was the first batch cooling in the distance, waiting for the testers to see if the mixture was right yet. Mahrree smiled in awe. "I never cease to be amazed by Salem's resourcefulness. With so many people working, all the ash should be converted to block in a few weeks." "It'll probably take longer than that, Mugga," Cambo said. "But I heard one of the supervisors estimate that in a season or two, no one will ever be able to tell we were buried under 8 inches of the stuff. The hope is to get it all together before the rains come and turn all of Salem into block. Uncle Pato said there's a committee already designing barns for holding the ash." "Remarkable," Mahrree whispered. "Just days ago I couldn't imagine where we could put all of this. We couldn't churn it into the soil or dump it anywhere that it wouldn't blow out again. But Shem was right. The Creator put everything here for us to find a better use for it. And if we can't think of a use, we better think until we do." She stopped because someone was exhaling in exasperation behind her. "So it's your fault my nephew is late getting me my file? I should have known." Mahrree turned around and smiled at her son from under her kerchief. Although she could see only his eyes, they were crinkled in a way that meant he was smiling back. "Right here," she said, pulling them out of her waistband. "I wouldn't let Cambo have them without taking me along. I just had to get out." Pato took the papers. "I understand. Just don't get caught, all right? Thanks, Cambo. Take her home, then get over to the western vineyards for another load." Mahrree remained silent while Pato jogged to the housing supervisor. Then she turned to her grandson. "I just got here, Cambo. You go get the load, bring it back, then we'll see if I'm ready to go home. I want to inspect that new block, see how it compares to what my mother's cottage was made out of." Cambo shrugged. "All right. Just be careful and steer clear of Uncle Shem. He's out here somewhere checking on the progress." He started back to his wagon, mumbling, "She wants to sit outside playing with blocks." She laughed. "Thanks, Cambo. Remember, you're my favorite grandson today." He waved without looking back. Mahrree rubbed her hands together with excitement and energy she hadn't felt in years, and headed over to the large pile of cooling block. She may not be young enough to sit on the mountain and watch the volcano, but she was still going to have some fun. She almost felt guilty for feeling so light-hearted, for being out in almost sunshine. And why shouldn't she be happy? The last day was coming, practically around the corner. She didn't care that Shem had made it clear to all of Salem in a recent message that the last day could still be years away. She didn't believe that. It was closer, much closer, and she was that much nearer to Perrin's return. Of course she was in an excellent mood. As she walked, unrecognized, outside of the working men and women, she nearly giggled. She went right past one of the guide's assistants without him recognizing her, and felt as if she'd snuck by the most fearsome guards in the world. She grinned when she spotted John Offra in the middle of it all. He'd been given the task of directing wagon traffic, pointing to which pit each should go. Cheerfully he barked out orders in full colonel mode, occasionally whistling at an errant ox, and once yanking back a mule that had ideas contrary to that of its driver. Behind him a little distance, watching but not interfering, was his helper and friend. On stacked bales of hay, Teeman sat cross-legged, smiling softly to see John with a purpose. Mahrree noticed that John kept Teeman in the corner of his eye. Occasionally John spun fully, as if to catch Teeman not there. But Teeman would nod back reassuringly, and Colonel Offra returned to shouting orders with renewed vigor. When Campbell came back an hour later, it took him a while to find his grandmother. And when he did, she was deep in discussion with one of her former students, who was sketching by the block cooling area. Campbell walked up behind them to observe. "Yes, yes," Mahrree said excitedly. "Much better. You're right, Lloyd. Just because it's rectangular doesn't mean everything made with block has to be as well. Those curves are amazing." "And it's not like it takes up more block, Professor Shin. I mean, woman under 70 whose identity I do not know," he chuckled. "Turning it at angles gives us a wider variety of possibilities." He drew another line on the house design he was working on, without a corner in it anywhere. "I'm sure when the general spirit walks by the new buildings, he'll be impressed with what block can do." Mahrree patted his shoulder. "Absolutely. I can hardly wait to see your first creation." Lloyd shrugged. May be a while. Looks like this first batch isn't staying together as they were expecting. But the brickmakers think they have the problem solved, so maybe in a few weeks." Mahrree noticed her grandson. "Campbell, look at this house plan. Block might actually be a good thing." "I just overheard that they're trying to see if they can paint it, too," Campbell told them. "Some of the artists are working on pigments and want to see if they can dye the ash before it's made into block." Mahrree sighed. "Oh, if only so many people weren't sick with the pox in the north, we could probably get everything done more quickly." But Lloyd said, "I don't think so, unknown woman. I don't know that we could fit any more workers here, but the ash is being moved efficiently. And honestly," his voice lowered, "since all of the farms and orchards are withering, creating block for the next few moons will be a good diversion from staring at dying crops." The three of them fell silent at that thought, watching as more block molds were moved into the hot kilns. "I always wondered why we needed so much in the emergency stores," Campbell muttered. "Sometimes it seemed a little excessive to have 4 years' worth of food and buildings all over Salem. But now, I almost wish it was 5 years, just to make sure we have enough." "Agreed," said Lloyd quietly. "For years we worked never knowing why, and then one day the answer is blowing right in front of us. I just thank the Creator I live in Salem." Mahrree nodded and fought the urge to look behind her at what was left of Mount Deceit and where another grandson might be. "Well," Campbell said, as if reading her mind and trying to divert her from useless pondering. "Mugga, time to get you home?" Oh no, Kimbo, I feel like I just got here. Lily's got dinner under control. Let me stay just a little longer. Lloyd chuckled at her plea that bordered on a whine. Is she worse than your 4-year-old? He asked Cambo. Much, he said, with a stern look in his light brown eyes. I heard the older they get, the more difficult they become. When this one turns 80, she'll be unbearable. Mahrree swatted his arm playfully. Oh, go get another load. I wanted to gather some of the samples of the failed block to bring to Ralph. Maybe he can carve it into something, or I can use it as a doorstop. All right, Mugga, just keep a low profile. Lloyd may not tattle on you, but others would. Mahrree wandered over to where the failed blocks were being dumped and squatted at the edges out of the way, ignoring the stiffness of her knees. Another woman, also with a kerchief around her face, kneeled next to her. Quite amazing, isn't it? She asked as she picked up a piece. Just days ago, I was trying to sweep it off my front porch, and now it's rock again. I was thinking the same thing, Mahrree said. There must be something useful we can do with this. A bit heavy for children's puzzles, though. Maybe for grinding grain, her companion suggested, as she smashed it on another piece. The block crumbled, and the women winced and chuckled at the result. I guess not, unless you like very coarse bread, the woman decided. Mahrree picked up the fragments. Maybe for scrubbing stains? I rub it on my hand, and it's getting some of the berry stains off. But that doesn't look comfortable, the woman observed. It's not, Mahrree agreed, dropping the pieces. But maybe it'd work for cloth. She put some crumbles in her pocket. I'll try it when I get home. There's plenty to scrub right now. Definitely, the woman said. She looked up at the kilns. Gray block, huh? Not the most pleasant-looking substance to build with. Oh, but it will be, Mahrree assured her. I was just speaking to one of the housing designers. Already he's drafting some beautiful ideas. His belief is even though the blocks are rectangular and gray, the buildings don't have to be. The woman sighed. Ugh, I hope not. My husband absolutely detested block, Mahrree told her. But I think even he might be converted to the idea. The woman glanced over at her. He saw block buildings? Did he serve in the world for a time? Mahrree looked at her in surprise. Someone who didn't know who she or her husband was? What a delightful turn of events! Yes, he served for a few years and hated block houses. The woman placed one broken block on top of another. Because they're cold, lifeless, and colorless. Dreadful. Did you used to live in the world? The woman nodded, tilting her head. Often in houses made from stuff just like this. Tiny boxes with small windows, many of them abandoned because newer, bigger ones were built. We could afford abandoned. I thought we'd gotten away from block, but now? Don't you worry, said Mahrree comfortingly. If there's something Salem knows how to do, it's surprise you. The woman looked up at her with cheerful eyes. Oh, we've been surprised, quite pleasantly. When Guide Zenas met us at the canyon, he promised us this was a place of miracles. Already I've made more friends than I thought possible. He's seen to that. He's taken such good care of us. He's a remarkable man. Mahrree grinned. Yes, he is. Even if he ordered people like me to stay indoors. If you see him, be sure to warn me. The woman chuckled. Are you over age or not immune to the pox? I had the pox the first time around, so now I'm just over age. Oh, what a terrible phrase. Sounds like I'm spoiled cheese for the pigs. The women chuckled as they played with the broken block. I just had to get out of the house, Mahrree explained. I think my daughter-in-law needed me out of the house as well. I know the feeling, the woman responded. I'm not quarantined. Both my husband and I had the pox. But my daughters aren't supposed to be out. However, my oldest decided that if the kerchief can keep out the dust, it can keep out the pox." The woman leaned closer to Mahrree and whispered, "She snuck out with me and is over there somewhere, tossing in firewood for the kilns. So if you see Guide Zenas, be sure to warn me as well. He wouldn't be happy to see her breaking his recommendation either." They laughed together and looked around for the guide. "Seems we're safe right now. So is your husband out there?" Mahrree asked. "No," the woman sighed. "He didn't come with us to Salem." "Oh, I'm sorry," Mahrree said. "I didn't realize." "Oh, it's all right. It wasn't as if he was expected to join us." Mahrree sighed. It's so difficult without a husband, isn't it?" The woman shrugged. "It wasn't so easy with that husband, either. I'm assuming you no longer have yours?" "Not on this side of the world, no. He's been in the next one for almost a year now." "I'm sorry," the woman said softly. "Sounds like you miss him." "Oh," Mahrree waved it off, "only 100 times a day." She glanced at the woman, who seemed relatively young despite the lines around her eyes. "You know," she started, "there are available men in Salem. You don't have to stay alone. You could find someone." The woman scoffed as if that was a hopeless cause. "Have you tried to find someone else?" "Not actively. I have enough family to keep me company, and I couldn't bear thinking about replacing the man I lost." "Well, I could easily replace the man I lost," the woman exclaimed. Mahrree grinned. "Oh, really? Well, consider me on the job. I need a project, and I'd love to find you a truly great man." The woman's eyes took on a sad quality. "Thank you, but I don't want to bother with men ever again. I've realized over the years that women and men see marriage differently." "How so?" Mahrree asked. The woman pushed back a wispy lock. "When women, girls, dream of marriage, they have a whole sappy list of what they think will happen. They believe that their husband will become not only their lover, but their friend. They'll spend every day together, talking, laughing, enjoying each other. He'll be attentive, and her happiness will be his main concern. It's a romantic and hopelessly silly list. But men," she scoffed, "ugh. As boys, they never think of girls except in one way. Then when they marry, they have only 2 items on their list: that she takes care of the needs of the house and the needs of him. Beyond that, she's irrelevant. He gets more joy out of his horse and would prefer spending the evening with his friends drinking or gaming. A wife is a maid who services him in bed. But a true companion, a mate for his soul, men don't need or want that. As long as their basic desires are met, that's it." Mahrree whimpered in dismay for the miserable woman next to her. "Oh, my dear, you've been far too long in the world. That's not how it is in Salem, I promise." The woman shrugged. "I wish that were true, but long ago I set aside my unrealistic expectations. Let's be honest, women are dreamers with too many needs. It's not a man's fault if his wife expected more from their marriage. It's her fault." She looked down at the block she was crushing under her fist. "Then, when she disappoints him in one of the only 2 things he expects from her, she's finished." Mahrree couldn't bear to see her so despondent. She gripped her arm and said, "I'm going to prove to you that all men are not like that. Men of Salem aren't so base. They have great feeling and warmth and love. They have souls that long for mates. They see women as far more than a maid and a—" She couldn't think of an appropriate word besides the vulgar sow that the world used. The woman looked up at her with eyes that were drained of all hope. "Perhaps your husband was that way, and maybe a couple others. But all of the good men have been taken long ago. It would take a miracle to find another one unattached." "Salem is a place of miracles," Mahrree reminded her. "We have some wonderful widowers ready for a lovely woman, "And I have made a very successful match once," she said, all energy and desperate to see some promise of joy light up the woman's dull eyes. "So, anything specific I should look for in your new husband? I'm going to convince you you're wrong, much to your delight." The woman chuckled. "My, but you are determined. But I'm warning you, with my background, this would be quite the project." She sat back and considered. "Only one requirement. No men who served in the army of Idumea." Mahrree nodded. "Bad experiences with the army?" "Oh, yes," the woman answered with a heavy sigh. "I'd be content to never see a uniform again." "Be warned, there are a few still in Salem, but all belonging to good men. Guide Zenas still has his," Mahrree said. "He pulls it out occasionally, but he can't get that middle button to fasten anymore. I heard one of his daughters say some of his chest muscle must have slid down to his belly." The woman snorted. "That's a terrible thing to say. I thought he looked quite fit when I met him." "Oh, he is," Mahrree chuckled. "Fitter than most men half his age. He's hardly aged at all." "So you've known him for quite a while?" "I have, a very long time. In fact, he's the one I made a match for. As soon as I met Calla, I knew that was his future wife. See, I can do this." The woman chuckled. "Well, if you can find me a man. I hope he's like Guide Zenas, but younger, like Rector Shin," she suggested, and Mahrree stopped turning over the block in her hands. A thought was occurring to her which should have struck her a while ago. "He's been most helpful to our family since we arrived," the woman continued wistfully. "Too bad the Shins couldn't have had more sons, so there'd be a lonely one for me." Mahrree did her best to keep her voice calm as she asked, "Just how long ago did you arrive?" "Barely a week ago," the woman said, peering closely at a block. "With the last group that came in. I understand it was one of the largest they ever had. I was really quite nervous. But the rector's son rode with me the entire time. A very nice young man. Too bad he's married. He would have been wonderful for one of my daughters. But I understand he has unmarried brothers." She chuckled sadly. "But if my husband ever heard that one of his daughters married someone with the last name of Shin, well, that would get him here." Mahrree turned to face the woman. She looked up from her piecing together a broken block. The smile in her eyes faded when she saw the surprise in Mahrree's. "You know," Mahrree began slowly, "we haven't been introduced yet. It was supposed to happen the day the mountain exploded, when you were to come to my house for midday meal." The woman paled. "Oh, my." Mahrree pulled down her kerchief and smiled. "And what I would have said then was, 'Welcome to Salem, Drusus Thorne.'" Mrs. Thorne dropped her block and held the sides of her face, her kerchief sliding down. "Mahrree Shin? Oh, my!" Mahrree took her gently by the shoulders. "Oh, please don't be alarmed. I really am happy to see you. We've been wondering how you've been faring, and—" Mrs. Thorne's tears surprised her. Mahrree stood up with some effort and pulled her up as well, taking her into a hug. "I hope you're not crying out of worry or fear," she said, patting her on the back, "because I don't fear you." She started to laugh. She tried to hold it back, but it was impossible. "I'm sorry, but I just remembered what you said about your husband." Mahrree pulled back to face Mrs. Thorne, who was now smiling too. "He's easily replaced?" Mrs. Thorne started to laugh, shaking her head and wiping her eyes. "I was so frightened to meet you. When I felt that tremor that morning, the first thing I thought was, 'Oh, good, now I don't have to face Mrs. Shin today.'" Mahrree laughed back. "So did I. I was not looking forward to meeting you or your daughters. I had no idea what to say that would be appropriate." So the Creator threw us together this way instead. My brother Shem was right, Mrs. Thorne. This is a place of miracles." A young woman ran over to them. "Mother, are you all right?" she asked as she pulled down her kerchief. But instead of looking at Drusus, she glared at Mahrree. "Yes, I'm fine, Versa," Drusus said, chuckling and dabbing her tears. Versa scowled in concern for her mother's odd behavior. "So you must be Versala," Mahrree declared, and analyzed the blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that were remarkably reminiscent of her father near the same age. She released Mrs. Thorne and stepped over to Versa. "Welcome to Salem." She wrapped her arms around the startled young woman, who did not return the hug. Mahrree stepped back, still holding a glowering Versa by the arms. "Remarkable. You look so much like him, but on you those features are simply beautiful." Versa's mouth dropped open. "Are you?" Mahrree nodded. "Having a wonderful time with your mother? We've been sitting here chatting and laughing about blocks and men without any idea who the other was. Yes, Versa, I'm Mahrree Shin, and I'm not supposed to be out here, as neither are you, I understand. So let's make sure we don't draw Shem's attention, shall we?" Versa continued to stare at her. "You are nothing like I imagined," she said tonelessly. Mahrree's eyebrows went up. "You know," she turned to Mrs. Thorne with an impish grin, "she even sounds like him. Perrin always said he had a long ways to go in diplomacy." She winked at Versa. Drusus sent a warning look to her daughter as Mahrree chuckled. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Shin," Versa said, still watching her steadily. "I really didn't expect to run into you. I'm just a little startled. Usually I'm much more polite." Her mother scoffed. "No, you're not." She turned to Mahrree. "You're right, though. I often called her the General because she has such an abrupt way about her. But she's been my strength all these years." She beamed with pride at her oldest daughter. "She's pulled me through it all." "You sound like a fascinating young woman, Versa Thorne Kaya," said Mahrree sincerely. "I'd like to get to know you better when all of this excitement dies down. I've heard a few stories about your past from Shem. You've lived a remarkable life. Have you considered writing it down? They made me write a book once we got here," she said. "They might want you to do the same thing." Versa finally managed a faint smile. "Yes, nothing like I imagined. That's a good thing, Mrs. Shin." She smiled more genuinely. "I'll have to get a copy of that book. I suppose this is a better way to meet you than over midday meal at your "And what are you doing out here?" The booming male voice made all three women jump. Mahrree cringed as she turned. Meekly she said, "Hi, Shem." "Don't hi Shem me, Mahrree Shin," the guide said sternly. "Do you have any idea what—" He stopped short when he saw who Mahrree was talking to. A smile began to grow on his face, but quickly hardened when he saw Versa. "And you," he pointed at her. "Didn't I quarantine you? The last thing I want for you, Versa, is to get the pox now." She scrunched her mouth apologetically. He turned to Mrs. Thorne. "But Drusus, I have no problem with you," he said with his familiar warmth, and gave her a quick hug. "Are you doing all right? Do you need anything?" Mahrree threw back her head and laughed. "Mrs. Thorne, he still likes you. Get me back into his good graces again, will you?" Shem put a brotherly arm around Mahrree and pulled her kerchief back over her nose with his free hand. "He would not be happy with you or me should something happen to you. You're supposed to be behaving yourself." Versa and Drusus quickly replaced their kerchiefs. Shem nodded his approval at Versa. He kept his arm firmly around Mahrree as if to keep her from escaping. Mahrree, how many times have you snuck out?" "This is the first time, honestly, Shem. Mahrree told me I should rebel, so I made Cambo take me. I just wanted to have a little fun." Shem's eyebrows rose at her use of the word fun. "How often have you coughed?" he asked severely, but his eyes were twinkling. "Not once." He turned to Versa and beckoned her to come closer so he could put a hand on her head. "No fever yet. Any itching?" Versa's eyes smiled at him. "No, guide. I'm healthy." He pointed at her. "Stay that way, young lady," he smiled. "And just so you know, I don't approve of either of you ignoring my recommendations. I make these rules because I'm worried about you, not because I'm trying to ruin," he turned to Mahrree, "your fun." Mahrree rolled her eyes at the thorn woman. "He used to be so much more fun before he became a father and the guide." She leaned closer to Versa. "Don't bother reading my book, but get a copy of Calla's about the army. There you'll see just how mischievous this very stern man used to be." She patted his belly. He sucked it in a little. "I especially recommend the chapter about his relationship with Karna. Shem used to pull the meanest tricks on the poor man, very un-Salem-like." "Mahrree!" Shem exclaimed as he pulled his arm off of her. She laughed as the thorn women chuckled. Shem's face softened as he watched her. "I've just become more mature," he explained, and leaned over to the thorns. "But if you really want to know how rotten she could be, remind me to share a few stories with you the next time I come by." Mahrree's eyes grew wide. What? What stories? Shem?" Shem grinned. "You should know it all, Mahrree. Ah, but wait. You're over 70, and maybe your memory is beginning to fail you. Otherwise, you would have remembered to not be out here. Cambo!" he called as he saw his nephew coming over to them. "Make sure she gets home safely in about an hour. Drusus, do you and Versa need a way home?" Drusus shook her head. "Anoki will come get us at dinner time." Shem turned back to Mahrree with his stern expression again. "The only reason," he whispered for just her to hear, "that I'm letting you stay out is because I love seeing you laugh again. Who would have imagined it would have taken a volcano's eruption and Lemuel Thorne's wife to accomplish that?" At the end of the day, it was Shem who brought Mahrree home. Cambo stayed near the greens to help fortify an older house whose roof was on the verge of collapse, and the guide was on his way back to the estates anyway. He helped Mahrree into the wagon and sat next to her on the bench, a little stiffly. "You know, I really can't remember the last time it was just you and me alone. I'm beginning to think it was before I was even married," he said, with a slightly nervous chuckle. "Probably true," Mahrree said. "I know you make it a practice to never be alone with a woman who's not your wife, but I think Salem will understand you're giving me a ride home today without a chaperone." Shem smiled as he drove the horses down the road. "I must say, Mahrree, I'm surprised to see you so chipper. Not that I'm not pleased to see you smiling and laughing again, but I can't help but wonder what's going on in that mind of yours." His voice quieted. "The anniversary's just 2 days away, you know." Mahrree sighed away her chipperness. "I know full well when the anniversary is," she said tightly. "You don't need to remind me when my husband died, Shem. It's just that—" She went silent. "It's just that what, Mahrree?" She took a deep breath. "Why be sad when it's nearly over?" He glanced sidelong at her. "When what's nearly over?" "This!" She gestured wildly. "Deceit! The world! Everything!" Leaning away to see her better, he said, "Mahrree, what are you talking about?" "The last day!" she nearly hollered. Unable to suppress her grin, she said, "When, Shem? When is it? I know he tells you things." Shem's jaw was slack as he stared at her. I don't know. You think I'd know that?" "You're the guide," she elbowed him. "The Creator must tell you everything." Strangely, Shem's shoulders drooped. "Oh, Mahrree," he said, with so much sympathy that she felt like pushing him off the bench. He was going to stab holes in her joy. She just knew it. First, Mahrree, this wasn't good. When someone begins with a list, it's never good. The Creator doesn't tell me everything, only what I need to know to lead His people. He makes me live by faith as well. Second, I haven't the foggiest idea when the last day will be. We've been directed to store food for 4 years. We don't even know for sure if this is the awakening. Yes, you do, she hissed at him. When we stood on the back porch looking at the ash falling, you looked up and said, "This is it, isn't it?" You weren't asking me. You were asking the Creator. So what did He say? Mahrree, Mahrree, Shem, come on, it's me. You can tell me. Mahrree, he said urgently, please don't do this. Don't ask what you can't know the answer to. So you know. I don't, he nearly wailed. I wish I did, but I probably won't even realize it until the very day when the deliverer appears, shakes my hand and says, "Thanks, I can take it from here." She scoffed, partly at his attitude and partly at his doubt. It's not for us to know, he said quietly, but to have faith that it is coming. She nearly mimicked him in her frustration. I mean, he continued, why would we have 4 years of supplies if we didn't have that many years to go? And even then it might not be the end, but just when we get to start planting again. Mount Deceit may do this again later. It could still be 20 or more years away. Why are you glaring at me like that? Because you don't believe it, she said, so bitterly it came out as a snarl. And I don't know why you won't admit it. I know that look in your eyes. You think the last day is soon, don't you? Then tell me. Shem sighed. Oh, Mahrree, why are you making such a big deal about... He glanced over again to see her fierce determination. But he saw something else as well. Oh, Mahrree, I think I understand. He put an arm around her and pulled her close. Perrin, right? She felt like she'd been stabbed and deflated. Shem's reticence could only mean, but he could be wrong. Yes, she said, the last day brings him back, to both of us. I'm so sorry, Mahrree, he groaned. I wish I could promise you differently, but it could still be years away. You saw Mount Deceit erupt, and you started to believe he was on his way back already. The first holes of doubt began to hurt. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a little guilty about it, but only a little. He could be on his way, Shem. Maybe this will bring young Perrin to his senses, and Perrin can... Why are you shaking your head? Shem's voice was very low. He's still very far away, Mahrree. He's not even an edge, but much further south. Getting back now will be very difficult, if he can get back at all. He's surrounded by danger, but doesn't recognize most of it. Mahrree sat up. Shem, I remember when you used to bring so much joy and hope. Every time I saw you, I'd grin, waiting to see what humor or teasing you'd bring. But the past couple of years, you've been as gloomy as my students in Edge on testing day. Well, that's harsh, Mahrree. Well, it's true. You could be a little more hopeful, a little more encouraging. Guide Gleese was never as glum as you are. Now you sound like a pouty 12-year-old. I feel like I hardly know you today. And I'm not glum, Mahrree. I'm just realistic. Can't you be realistic in an optimistic way? You used to be. He blew out in annoyance. Ugh, the last day is coming, Mahrree. I have full confidence it will be glorious. We may have to wade through a few rough days until we get there, though, but all will be glorious in the end. How was that? Pitifully inadequate, she said. But I suppose they'll have to do. I suppose I can go on with my calling then. Good thing I don't need your approval. She gripped his arm. I'm sorry. You have my full approval. You always have. You're a tremendous guide. No man could handle this better than you. I don't think I tell you that enough. I don't think you've ever told me that before. Really? Shem shrugged. Doesn't matter. I don't do it for compliments. When Versa opened the front door of the second resting station, she was not in a good mood. Delia saw the severe look in her eyes and shriveled in the stuffed chair she was sitting in, holding her book higher as a shield. But Versa wasn't glaring at her sister. She was boring holes into her husband, who snored softly on one of the large sofas. Mrs. Thorne followed her daughter into the large gathering room and pursed her lips when she saw why her oldest daughter was fuming. Versa slammed the front door with a loud bang. Anelki jolted awake and sat up. What was that for? What are you doing? Versa demanded. He rubbed his eyes. Just napping. Why? Because I was tired? How could you be tired? It's only dinner time, and you've done nothing at all but sit here? I got up early to milk that stupid cow and the sick neighbor's stupid cows. That's hard work. Doesn't seem like it would be, but you'd be surprised. And I did it again this afternoon. Slipping behind her daughter, Drusus crept over to the kitchen. Priscilla was just coming out, but when she felt the tension thickening, she retreated. Delia held the book a little higher. Versa put her hands on her waist. Milking cows twice a day is hard work. I'll tell you what's hard work. Standing outside for 7 hours moving kindling. No one told you to do that, he snapped. In fact, you're not supposed to be out at all. That was your choice to get all dirty. He grimaced at her dusty appearance. Well, if you're not going to do your part, I need to. My part is supposed to be taking care of things here. But you're immune. You don't need to be napping. You should be out there helping these people. Why? For all they've done for us. Anelki scoffed. What have they done? Brought me and my mother home today, for one. You were supposed to pick us up hours ago. Fortunately, someone else's husband gave us a ride home. I don't think he even lives around here. He did your duty. Doesn't that make you feel anything? Smirking, he said, Makes me glad I didn't bother hitching up the horses. You made it home. What's the big deal? The big deal? Versa exclaimed. You were supposed to get us. Someone else had to take care of us. Anelki's smirk turned smug. That's the way it's supposed to work in Salem. Everyone takes care of us. No, it's not. What is with you? Why don't you get it? Get what? He bellowed at her. This is not what I expected. How much longer are we trapped here? Versa held out her arms in dismay. Trapped? In a huge building with a dozen bedrooms, an enormous library and kitchen, and more food than I've ever seen in a year. Anelki, this is luxury. What do you want? Tell me, what do you really want? He scoffed. You just don't get it. I don't, she yelled at him. So tell me, what don't I get? He stood up. Call me when dinner's ready. Where are you going? To bed? He stormed to the other side of the gathering room and up the stairs to the bedrooms that filled the second level. Ugh! Versa hollered at him and kicked over a chair. Drusus came flying out of the kitchen. Versa, everything all right? Just wonderful, Mother. Delia lowered her book. Doesn't sound wonderful. Versa shot her a look, and Delia took cover behind her book again. I don't know what's wrong with him, Mother, Versa said. He does nothing all day. He complains about everything. What am I supposed to do with him? Drusus sighed and sat down on one of the sofas. I'm not exactly the best person to ask about marital problems, Versa. What did he do all day? Versa demanded of her sisters. Priscilla slipped into the gathering room, glancing around to make sure it was safe. He did take care of the cows, and he was outside for a long time this afternoon, but I don't know what he was doing. She shrugged. Do you, Delia? Delia shook her head. I've been reading all day. Drusus, desperate to improve the mood, beamed at her middle daughter. Find anything interesting, dear? Delia's eyes lit up. Oh, hundreds of books. I'm reading a story right now about two families that fought until the son of one family fell in love with the daughter of another, and the simmering of her older sister stopped her, and Delia hesitated, unsure if she should go on. Versa sighed apologetically. Sounds like a good story, Delia. Maybe I'll read it when you're through. She threw herself on a chair she hadn't kicked over yet. Why is he acting like this? Why does he hate everything here? It doesn't make any sense. Drusus shrugged. I'm sorry, Versa. Maybe it's because he doesn't feel a purpose yet. Men need to know where they fit in society, what their job is. If they don't have that, they get irritable and frustrated. Anoki knew only the army and law enforcement. Neither of those jobs is needed here. It's been a big adjustment coming here. Then the volcano, and now he's stuck in this house with 4 women. Have you considered it might just be a bit much for him to handle? Versa sighed. Well, I can handle it all. Priscilla rolled her eyes in the same annoying way Anoki had. Of course, Versa can handle anything. Leave it all to Versa. Versa pointed at her. I'm not taking that mouth of yours tonight, Prissy. Don't you start with me or you'll regret it. Girls, Drusus said sharply. Enough. Delia peeked over her book again. I'm fine, Mother. Priscilla growled quietly at her. Of course you are. Delia's always the good girl. Hey, Versa shouted, rising to her feet again. Lay off of her, Prissy. I swear, you're getting as irritable as Anoki. I'm so bored, Priscilla shouted back. There was supposed to be entertainments and stuff to see, but this is a lot better than dying down in the world, Prissy. Ask Delia. There's hundreds of books to read. Delia nodded eagerly. I found one all about Guide Zenas and Colonel Shin's experiences in the army, and there's another one all about the history of the world. Priscilla flopped herself dramatically on the sofa. Books of army stories and world history. Just kill me now before the boredom does. But Versa was too interested to chastise her younger sister. Delia, is one of them by Mrs. Shin? Delia nodded hesitantly. Versa surprised her by smiling. You know, we met her today. Really? Delia's eyes grew big. What was she like? Drusus smiled at the break in the arguing. Quite lovely. We actually had fun, and she thinks she's going to find me a new husband. Delia was shocked. She is? Her mother waved that off with a chuckle. Oh, I don't know. She said she knows a few good widowers. So, Delia began tentatively, you didn't see any sign that she and Guide Zenas ever... Drusus shook her head. We spent about 2 hours together, and she spoke so much of her husband that it was obvious she was devoted to only him. Even when Guide Zenas came over to talk with us, I could tell she didn't see him as anything more than a brother. Delia developed a worldly smirk. But what about Guide Zenas when he saw her? Versa held out her hands. She's 70-something years old, and he's not a young man either anymore. Mrs. Shin didn't look that old to me, Drusus decided. I thought she seemed more in her 50s than her 70s, and the guide is only in his 60s and still quite handsome. Old people, Priscilla grumbled from the sofa. Yuck! Versa shrugged her off. Trust me, Delia, there was nothing there besides a long friendship. All the world's stories were false. That's good, Delia said. I hoped they were. Priscilla sighed loudly. Grand! Not even a good scandal around here for entertainment. So what do you want? Versa demanded. Something to do, Priscilla hollered and sat up. I'm sure there's going to be something going on at the amphitheater in Mid-Plain tonight. Prissy, Mid-Plain is gone, Versa shouted. Do you understand that there's a mountain on top of it? Priscilla looked dubious. That's only the scientists' guesses. They don't really know. How can they? They go on top of the mountains and... Versa motioned furiously. Figure things out. I don't know it all either. But they have some ways of measuring volume and direction and distance, and by their estimates, all of Deceit is now one long sloping hill over the middle of the northern world. Now, is that the kind of entertainment you want? Trying to survive in that kind of chaos? I don't. Drusus put on a fake smile and clapped her hands. Who's hungry for dinner? I know I am. Cheese, bread, dried beef, and berries? Doesn't that sound good? Delia nodded eagerly and marked her page in the book. I'll help get it ready, Mother. Versa stared at Priscilla, knowing exactly what the 16-year-old was going to say next. Didn't we have that for dinner yesterday? Priscilla whined. Her sister cracked her knuckles. Why, you ungrateful little... Versa, Drusus snapped and immediately took a deep breath. Versa, she began in a false cheery tone, would you care to retrieve your husband for dinner? Not particularly. Priscilla hopped off the sofa. I'll go get him, she volunteered. At least that will kill a minute or two. And she bounded up the stairs. Drusus and Delia headed into the kitchen, while Versa drummed her fingers on the armrest and put her other hand on her belly. Alone, she looked up. What are we going to do with them? She whispered. And that's the end of that long chapter. Thank you.